The child was already in the carriage when Marin found her. Not waiting by the steps in the approved fashion, not standing at the door with a maid in attendance, sitting inside, on Marin's trunk, with her small hands folded and her expression arranged into the particular stillness of a person who has made a decision and does not intend to be argued out of it. The carriage lantern had not yet been lit. The yard was gray with early morning, the kind of cold that smells of iron and coming snow, and Marin Ashwell stood in the open door with her valise in one hand and thought, of all the things this fortnight has taken from me, I did not expect it to take this too. She did not know yet what the child's waiting would cost her. Had she known, she would have climbed in all the same. Lady Petra. She kept her voice even. You cannot come with me. I am already here, said the child, with the logic of 7 years old and the composure of 70. That is different from coming. The yard was not empty. Somewhere behind her, Marin could hear the bootboy retreating across the cobbles, and she understood without turning that the news would be inside the house in 4 minutes and before his grace in 6. She had 6 minutes then. She had perhaps 6 minutes before the thing she was carrying, the secret she had held for 11 days, the weight of which had woken her at 2 a.m. every morning since, was taken out of her hands entirely. She had planned to be through the gate by now. She had planned to be away. The deadline had been her own choosing. The quarterly coach to London left the Crossroads Inn at 7, and it would not wait, and once she was on it, she would be beyond reach of Ashmore Hall, and beyond reach of the Duke of Ashmore, and beyond reach of whatever it was she felt when he stood still in a room, and the room arranged itself around him. 40 minutes. She had thought 40 minutes was enough. She had not accounted for a 7-year-old with her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. Petra. She set the valise down and climbed inside and pulled the door to behind her, because the cold was becoming a problem, and because what happened next should not have an audience. How did you know I was leaving? Mrs. Gould told Cook, and Cook told Nan, and Nan thought I was asleep. The child's chin lifted, very slightly. I was not asleep. No, Marin said. I can see that. A silence settled between them, the kind Marin had learned to read in this house, where silence was the language of power and grief, and the things no one was permitted to say directly. Petra's silence was not peaceful. It had a shape to it, and the shape was the shape of a question she was deciding whether to ask. She had her father's manner. She had her father's extraordinary self-possession and her father's habit of going very quiet before saying the thing that cut cleanest. Marin had been in this house 3 months as the child's companion, and she had spent a significant portion of those 3 months studying the resemblance with the thoroughness she normally reserved for problems she intended to solve. She had not solved this one. She was leaving instead. You said, Petra began, and then stopped. I said a great many things. Which particular one? You said that the people who love you are the ones who stay. The small hands tightened in her lap, even when staying is difficult. You said difficult was not the same as impossible. Marin looked at the child for a long moment. The lantern was not lit. In the gray light, Petra's face was very serious and very young and very like her father's, and Marin felt the thing she had been refusing to name for 11 days press against her ribs, with its full weight. She had told the girl that on a Tuesday, sitting on the nursery floor with a map between them, discussing the navigation of large social difficulties by the example of explorers who had turned back and lived, and explorers who had not turned back and also lived, though under harder circumstances. She had not known, when she said it, that she was making a promissory note. Children, she was learning, collected them like coins. I will explain something to you, Marin said, and I need you to understand that I am speaking to you as I would speak to a person of sense, not as one speaks to a child. Can you do that? I have been doing it for some time, Petra said. You are the one who keeps forgetting. This was unanswerable. Marin acknowledged it with a small tilt of her head. I am leaving because I was asked to leave. Your father. She stopped. She began again. The Duke made it plain, last evening, that my position in this house has become untenable. Those were his words. I am leaving because the alternative is staying somewhere I am not wanted, which is not the same as difficult. That is a different category entirely. Petra was quiet for a moment. Her eyes, which were gray like her father's, and too knowing for her face, moved over Marin's expression with a thoroughness that was not comfortable to be under. Papa did not look like a man who did not want someone, she said finally, when he came up from the library last night. He looked like a man who had done something he was not certain of. Your father's certainty is not a subject I am qualified to discuss. But you are qualified. You are better at faces than anyone in this house. You said so. I should not have said so. But it was true. It was true. It was, if Marin were honest with herself in the privacy of a dark carriage at 6 a.m, precisely the problem. She had come to Ashmore Hall because she was qualified. 30 years of careful invisibility in great houses, 17 of them as companion tutor to children whose parents noticed them infrequently, had made her competent in the specific discipline of reading what rooms and faces and silences said when their owners would not. She read accounts for discrepancies the way other women read novels, and she had a memory for numbers that people tended to underestimate because she was plain and quiet and dressed in gray. It was this competence, specifically, that had undone her. She had not been at Ashmore Hall a fortnight before she found the first irregularity. It had not looked like much. A column in the quarterly household account, the itemized ledger she had been given access to because the previous companion had kept Petra's education expenses logged there, and no one had thought to move the access once Marin arrived. A single entry, repeated across 3 months at irregular intervals, totaling a sum that was not impossible, but was improbable, listed under the heading of the late Duchess's charitable dispensations. The charitable dispensations had ceased with the Duchess's death, 14 months prior. The entry had not ceased with them. Marin had filed it away in the manner she had learned over 30 years, the back of her mind, cross-referenced, held lightly. She was a companion. It was not her column to query. The second irregularity she found in the household correspondence files, which she had been given access to for an entirely different reason, searching for a letter regarding Petra's previous tutor's references. The letter she found instead was older, 18 months, the month before the Duchess died, and it was addressed in a hand she recognized because she had seen it on the household accounts, and it was addressed to an apothecary in the nearest market town, and the substance of it made her sit very still in the corridor for a long time before she put it back precisely where she had found it and went to give Petra her geography lesson. She had told no one. She was a companion. She had no proof of anything except the habit of pattern, and the pattern she saw was one she could not say aloud without evidence, because what she saw, if she named it plainly, was this. The Duchess of Ashmore might not have died of the fever everyone agreed she had died of. And the person whose hand appeared in the accounts and on the letter to the apothecary was Mr. Corvin Ashwell, the Duke's cousin, the estate's steward, the man who stood to inherit everything if the Duke died without a direct heir, and who had been treating Marin with an increasing attentiveness she had initially read as charm and had recently revised into something else entirely. She had decided to be invisible about it, in the way she had been invisible about difficult things for 30 years. She had decided to say nothing to anyone, compile nothing, ask nothing, and leave before the pattern resolved into something she could not unknow. She had not decided to tell the Duke. She had, last evening, told the Duke anyway. The corridor outside the library, 9 o'clock, a wrong door opened when she was lost in the dark half of the house after delivering a book Petra had insisted could not wait until morning, and the Duke had been standing at the window with his back to the room, and she had said, into the absolute silence, the thing she had been holding for 11 days, in its plainest form, without preamble. Because she was standing in the dark with the weight of it, and she was tired. His Grace had listened without turning. Then he had turned, and his face had been the thing she had been trying not to think about since, not cold, not dismissive, not anything she had a clean word for. He had looked at her for a long moment, and then he had said, in the quiet voice that she had learned was not indifference, but its opposite, Miss Ashwell. You will want to be careful. She had understood it as a threat. She had packed her bags. Now, in the carriage, with Petra's 2 knowing eyes on her face, Marin thought for the first time that she might have understood it wrong. He told me to be careful, she said aloud, though she had not meant to. Petra tilted her head. That is what he says to the things he wants to keep. The door of the carriage opened, not the footman, not the boot boy. The Duke of Ashmore himself, in his coat but not his gloves, with his dark hair uncovered and the cold morning behind him, opened the carriage door and stood in it. He was a tall man, and he made the door smaller than it was. He looked at his daughter with an expression that, on a less composed face, might have been helpless. Petra, he said, come inside. I am staying with Miss Ashwell. Miss Ashwell is not staying. Then I am going with Miss Ashwell. A pause. The Duke looked at Marin. Marin looked back at him, which she had learned was the most dangerous thing she could do, and which she did anyway, because she was tired of managing her own responses with the care of a woman tending a small flame in a large wind. Would you step out, he said, so that we may speak? There is nothing left to say, Your Grace. I believe we covered the material last evening. We did not. He did not raise his voice. He had never, in 3 months, needed to. I gave you a warning, which I did not explain, because I was not at my best. I am asking you now to step out of the carriage and give me 5 minutes. The London coach, I will have it held. You cannot hold the public coach. I own the inn, said the Duke of Ashmore, and there was something in his voice, not quite amusement, not quite despair, that Marin had never heard there before. And she felt it move through her with the thoroughness of a cold she wouldn't name. She looked at Petra. Petra looked at her father. Then Petra climbed off the trunk with great dignity and sat on the carriage seat and folded her hands and said, I will stay here, in case you need a witness. Marin stepped out of the carriage. The yard was still gray, still cold, and the Duke was standing 3 feet from her, with his coat open at the throat and his breath making small clouds in the air. She was aware, in the manner she was always aware, of the exact geometry of the space between them. She was also aware that she had not slept, that her eyes were probably showing it, and that she had worn the gray dress because she had meant to be invisible today and was failing. Tell me, he said, precisely what you found. Your Grace, what I found is a pattern of, precisely, in full. With dates, she told him. She had been keeping the dates in the back of her mind for 11 days, cross-referenced, held in the order she would need to produce them, the way she had always held difficult things. She told him the first account entry, the date, the sum, the reference heading. She told him the letter to the apothecary. She told him what the entries preceding the Duchess's death had been, and what they had become after, and what the sum across all 3 months totaled. She told him the name on the correspondence. His face, as she spoke, did not change. It was the stillness of a man absorbing a blow and refusing to let it report on his surface. She had seen this face before. Petra had it too, and she had learned not to mistake it for indifference. "How long have you known?" he asked when she finished. 11 days. "Why did you say nothing?" "I am a companion," she said. "I had no proof. What I had was a pattern and a letter I had no official access to. Accusations without proof from a woman in my position against a man in Mr. Ashwell's position. Your Grace does not need me to explain the arithmetic of that." Something moved across his face, fast and dark, and was controlled. "When I told you to be careful," he said, "I meant that you were in a house with a man who had reason to be alarmed if he suspected you knew what you knew. I did not mean. I was not dismissing you. I was afraid." He stopped on the word as if he had not intended it to be the word, and yet there it was. "I am not often afraid. I was not certain what to do with it." Marin looked at him for a long moment. The morning was lightening, imperceptibly, around them. "I thought it was a threat," she said. "I know." He looked away, then back. "I have a habit, which has been noted before, of delivering concern in a register indistinguishable from displeasure. It is not, I am told, it is not a commendable habit." A pause, and then, so quietly she nearly missed it, my wife noted it. Often, the space between them had not changed in distance, but in some other dimension she didn't have a name for. "I see," she said, though she was not yet certain what she was seeing. "Stay," he said, and then, as if the word had not been enough and he knew it, "not because you know something that makes you dangerous to leave unprotected, though that is also true. Stay, because Petra has been. I have watched my daughter in these 3 months more carefully than she knows, and what she is now, in whatever small way, is partly yours." He looked at the carriage, and his voice did something complicated. "She laughed at breakfast last week. I had not heard her laugh since January of last year." Marin knew the breakfast he meant. She had told a story about a goat she had once managed to accidentally liberate at a county fair, and Petra had laughed until she had to put her fork down, and Marin had felt the laugh like sunlight on her wrists. She had not known the Duke had been there. She had not seen him in the doorway. She had the feeling, standing in the cold yard with the carriage behind her and the great house in front of her, and this man between, that she had been misreading a great number of things. "I made an error of judgment," she said carefully. "Last evening, we both made errors. Mine was larger." He seemed to make a decision, and the decision rearranged something in his face. "Come inside, Miss Ashwell. I need to think. I have been thinking for 11 days, and I have reached the limit of what I can think alone. A beat. And I will not hold the public coach indefinitely. I do own the inn, but the innkeeper has opinions." Against every intention she had formed in the last 18 hours, Marin felt the corner of her mouth move. She did not let it become anything. But it moved. She went inside. The house felt different in the early morning than it did at any other hour, quieter and more honest, stripped of the daytime performances of grandeur that great houses put on for themselves. Marin had always thought a house revealed its character before 7. Ashmore Hall's character was proud, cold at the surfaces, unexpectedly warm at its core, which was a description she was aware also applied to its owner, and which she was not going to examine. The Duke did not take her to the formal drawing room. He took her to the small study off the library, the one that smelled of beeswax and old paper and the particular indefinable scent she had learned meant he had been in the room recently, which her better judgment had been filing under Do Not Notice for 3 months. He poured 2 cups of tea from the tray that had apparently been waiting, which meant someone in this house had known they would need it, and handed her one without asking how she took it, because he had noticed without appearing to, which was another thing she had been choosing not to examine. "Sit," he said, and gestured to the chair that happened to be the one she always chose, because its angle let her see both doors and the window. She sat. He did not. He stood at the window with his tea and looked out at the yard where the carriage was still waiting, which he could see from here, and she thought, he watched the carriage come out. He watched me go to it. He stood here in the dark at 6 in the morning and watched. She filed this carefully in the back of her mind and said nothing. "Tell me," he said, still facing the window, "what you think happened. Not what you can prove. What you think." "I think," she said, "that Mr. Corvin Ashwell has been managing money that was not his to manage. I think the charitable dispensations were a mechanism, a channel through which funds moved that was not closely watched after her Grace's death, because grief excuses a great many gaps in accounting, and because everyone assumed the entries were a bookkeeping lag, old obligations being settled. I think the letter to the apothecary predates the fever by 3 months and names a compound that is not, by any medical text I have read, a treatment for fever." She stopped. "I think I cannot say the rest of it aloud without more than I have." His shoulders had gone very still at the window. "I know," he said, "what the compound does. The quiet that followed was not an empty quiet. Your Grace, she was ill." His voice was level and cost him something to keep so. She was genuinely ill. There was a fever. The fever weakened her. "What I do not know, what I have not been able to." He stopped. He turned from the window. His face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, which meant she could see the grief in it, the old permanent grief that she had been reading for 3 months as coldness and had been wrong about. "I need the letter, and I need the accounts, and I need someone who can." His jaw tightened. "I cannot do this alone. I have been trying to do this alone, and I have been doing it badly." "You have been doing it," she said. "For how long?" 7 months. He met her eyes. "Since I found a discrepancy in the land accounts last November. I have been looking ever since. I have found pieces. I have not been able to assemble them into something that would survive examination, because the pieces I am missing are in Corvin's possession, and because the man has been in this house for 14 years, and whatever he has done, I believed him to be honest for 14 of them, and it is," he stopped again. "It is an expensive belief to revise," she said. "Yes," he said it as if she had named a specific pain accurately. "Yes, that is what it is." They looked at each other across the small study in the early morning light. The tea was cooling. Outside, the carriage horse shifted and stamped, a domestic sound, impatient. And Marin thought, the way out of this is not alone, and it is not a way. She thought, I have been careful and invisible for 30 years, and it has kept me safe and entirely at the edges of things. And here is a man who is trying to be safe and invisible and alone, and he is failing for the same reason I am. She thought, I know where the letter is. Your Grace, she said. I can get you the letter. Something changed in his face, not quite hope, because he was too controlled for hope to arrive openly, but its handwriting, faint and recent, on an expression long unaccustomed to it. It is in the household correspondence files, she said. In the blue portfolio on the second shelf. It is filed behind the stable accounts for 18 months ago, which is where someone put it, because the stable accounts are where no one looks. I put it back exactly where I found it. I can have it in your hands in 10 minutes. He was very still. You went back and replaced it, he said, instead of taking it. I had no business taking correspondence that did not belong to me. I had no standing to take it. Taking it would have made it less than useful as evidence, because the first question at any examination would have been how I came by it, and the answer would have undermined everything that followed. He looked at her for a long moment. Corvin has been careful, he said finally. He has been careful and managed and charming for 7 months, and I have been looking for some piece of carelessness. I did not think to look in the stable accounts. Mr. Ashwell is very clever, she said. He put it somewhere logical for its purpose, a letter to a tradesman, filed with trade correspondence, and somewhere that relies on social architecture rather than physical concealment. No one of his standing looks at the stable accounts because the stable accounts are beneath them. He did not account for a companion who finds the stable accounts restful. Something moved in the Duke's expression. A very small thing, barely there, but she was close enough and good enough at faces to catch it. You find the stable accounts restful, he said. I find numbers restful. They say what they mean. Unlike people. Quite unlike, the small thing in his expression became, briefly and carefully, a curve at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Exactly, she had not seen the Duke smile, not in 3 months. She had a specific private theory about what it would look like, but its precursor. Its shadow. The thing that happened in the face a few seconds before. Marin looked at her tea because she needed to look at something that was not that. The letter alone is not enough, she said. I know where it is. I know what it says. But an old letter from an apothecary addressed to a man who has many legitimate reasons to correspond with apothecaries on behalf of a large household. No, he had gone back to thinking. She could see it in the way his stillness changed quality. No, alone it is not enough. But combined with the account entries, and with something I have been trying to get for 6 months, he stopped. There is a second ledger. Corvin keeps a second set of accounts. I know this because a groom saw him with it in the counting house at an hour when the counting house is empty of everyone else, and told me so, and I have spent 6 months trying to establish where it is kept. If I had the letter and the account entries in your hand and the ledger, where does Mr. Ashwell go, she asked, when he believes he is unobserved? He looked at her. The old still room, at the far end of the east wing. The door has a broken latch that he had repaired 2 years ago and has kept repaired, which is the only repair that wing has had since my grandfather's time. I noticed it because I notice things that cost money. A pause. I did not think to wonder why. Is it kept locked? The repaired latch locks. Yes, and who has the key? Corvin and... He stopped. He looked at the desk. And the household master key, which is kept in the butler's pantry and is used, in the normal course, perhaps twice a year. Mr. Burrell, she said, takes his dinner at 6 and is in his pantry by 8 and asleep by 9. He keeps the master key on the right hook inside the pantry cupboard. I know this because Petra's kitten got into the pantry in my 2nd week, and Mr. Burrell called me in to retrieve it, which I did, and I have the kind of memory that keeps what it sees even when the seeing was not intentional. The Duke looked at her for a moment that had several things in it. You have, he said, been in this house for 3 months. I have, she agreed. And you know where the master key is, and where the letter is, and you have every account entry memorized. The entries, yes, I do not need the physical ledger for those. I could write them out for you now in full. The letter I cannot reproduce from memory. I read it once, and it was enough to know what it was, but not enough to recall it word for word. Miss Ashwell. He set his tea down. I owe you an apology. Several apologies. For last night, principally, and I have been watching you work for 3 months, and I have not acknowledged it. I do not say that to explain the oversight. I say it because I should have said something weeks ago and did not, and this seems like the moment when honesty is preferable to nothing. She looked at him. He was serious and still, and his hands were on the desk and not quite comfortable there, which was the most human she had ever seen them. Your Grace, she said, I came to this house to teach geography and French and household management to a 7-year-old. I found something I was not looking for and said nothing about it for 11 days because I did not know what saying it would cost me. Last night, I told you, and then assumed the worst of your response. I am not in a position to lecture on the subject of honesty. A beat. No, he said. We are both, it seems, better at keeping things in than saying them. It appears so. Another beat. The morning had grown lighter outside the window. The carriage horse stamped again. Tonight, he said. After the house is quiet. I will have a reason to be in the East Wing. I have been taking late walks. It is established. The household has grown used to it. If the still room can be opened, and if what I believe is in it, then I have the letter and the accounts from your memory and the ledger, and I can take the 3 to my solicitor in town, and I will have the 4 witnesses I need. He stopped. The 2 footmen who carry the correspondence, and Burrell, and the groom who saw him. And you. I am not a witness your solicitor will be glad to see. My solicitor, said the Duke evenly, will be glad to see anyone who can close a case he has been trying to build for 7 months. Your position in this household is, he looked at her. I am aware it is not what it should be. I am aware that what I am asking puts you in a position of, he paused, and something moved in his face that she did not have a name for yet. I am asking a great deal. You are asking me, she said, to do what I should have done 11 days ago. That is not a great deal. That is simply late. He looked at her, and then something happened to his face that she had been theorizing about for 3 months. The smile arrived. It was brief and real, and it changed his face entirely, from grave to something she did not have a word for, something that had warmth and self-deprecation and a kind of rusty quality, as if the mechanism had not been used in a long time. She looked at the tea again. The tea was cold. She looked at it anyway. Tonight, then, she said. Tonight, he paused. And, Miss Ashwell, send the carriage away. She sent the carriage away. Petra, informed from the nursery window by some intelligence of children that Marin could not trace, appeared at the top of the stairs 2 minutes later with an expression of thoroughgoing satisfaction and said, I knew you would not leave. You were not supposed to know anything. You were supposed to be asleep. I was supposed to be asleep, and instead I was a deciding influence on the events of the morning. Petra descended 3 steps and regarded her with composure. Nan says I am a great trial. I think she means it as a compliment. Nan, said Marin, is more perceptive than you give her credit for. She said it without severity. Petra, who received all tones accurately, heard the warmth in it and nodded once, and came the rest of the way down the stairs and slipped her hand through Marin's arm with the unself-consciousness of a child who had decided a thing and was not going to be shy about it. They went to the morning room. Marin taught French. The day proceeded. Mr. Corvin Ashwell joined them for dinner at 8, as he did most evenings, and he was everything he always was, beautiful in the way of a man who has spent thought on his appearance. Immaculate, easy in conversation, possessed of the particular attentiveness that Marin had spent 3 months revising her reading of. He sat across the table and spoke of the eastern pasture drainage and a matter of contracts with a tenant farmer, and he smiled at Marin twice, and both times the smile was the smile of a man who had checked, in the manner of long habit, that a person who might be a problem was still manageable. She smiled back with the small, pleasant smile she had perfected over 30 years of being in rooms where she was not quite the problem anyone was looking at. Under the table, she was counting the days in the account entries. She was rehearsing the order in which she would say them. Across the table, the Duke was speaking to Ashwell about the eastern pasture with every appearance of attention, and he did not look at her once, which was exactly right, and which she noticed anyway. The house went quiet at 10. The household was not, in the ordinary way, early to bed. There were still lights in the servants' hall, still a fire in the drawing room. But the east wing was always quiet by 9, and the counting house was in the east wing, and the still room was beyond it. At 10:30, Marin walked quietly to the butler's pantry. The pantry was empty. The cupboard was the third from the left. The key was on the right hook, which it always was, because Mr. Burrell was a man of exact habits, and his exactness was one of the things she had relied on. She carried the key to the east wing and found the Duke already there. In the dark, with a candle that he shielded automatically with his hand when she rounded the corner, and in the moment before he saw it was her, she saw his face in the candlelight, alert, watchful, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, and she thought, he has been carrying this alone for 7 months. He has been in this house with this man, at this table, at this dinner. Every evening for 7 months. The key, she said quietly, and held it out. He took it. Their hands did not touch. The still-room door was at the end of the passage, and the lock turned as it should have, as a maintained lock turns, smoothly and without sound. Inside, the still-room smelled of old herbs and dust. There was a shelf of bottles along one wall, contents long gone pale, and a table, and in the table's single drawer, because the only hiding place a confident man uses is the obvious one, a ledger, thin, bound in brown leather, with Mr. Ashwell's hand inside it in a compressed notation she recognized from the account entries, and beside it, 3 letters in the same hand, addressed to the same apothecary, across a span of 4 months. She held the candle while the Duke read. She watched his face while he read. Because she could not help it, and because what moved across it was the thing she had suspected for 7 months was there, under the armor of the grief and the silence and the unilateral protective management of every difficult thing, a plain and terrible love for a woman who was a year gone, and the cost of understanding, at last, what it had actually cost. She did not intrude on it. She held the candle and was still. "This is enough," he said finally. He said it very quietly. "This is more than enough." Yes, he looked at her. The candlelight did something to his face that she was going to have to stop noticing. "Thank you," he said, and the simplicity of it from this man who did nothing simply was its own complete thing. "We should go," she said. "He takes his nightcap in the library at 11. They went. They put the key back on its hook. And they did not speak again that night, and Marin lay awake until 2 in the morning, in the way she had been lying awake until 2 in the morning for 11 days, but for a different reason now, with a different weight. And she thought, tomorrow. And the letter is in the blue portfolio. And one other thing she thought only once, and then put away firmly with the discipline of 30 years. In the morning, Ashwell's manner at breakfast was what it always was, easy, pleasant, attentive. He complimented the kedgeree. He inquired after Petra's progress in geography. He was, Marin thought, very good. She had always known he was good. She had known it from the first week, filed under the heading of relevant but unactionable. It was actionable now. The Duke spoke to his solicitor by letter that morning, and the solicitor was on horseback to Ashmore Hall by afternoon, and the name of the man who came was Mr. Theodosius Fenn, who was elderly and exact and who had, as the Duke had promised, been trying to build this case for 7 months. He sat in the small study with the door closed, and Marin gave him the account entries from memory, one by one, and he noted them against his own records, and when she was finished, he set his pen down and looked at her over his spectacles. "You have carried all of this," he said, "for 11 days. "Yes, sir, in your head. "The entries, yes, the letter I retrieved from the portfolio this morning." She set it on the table. "And there are 3 further letters in the stillroom ledger. His Grace has them." Mr. Fenn looked at the letter for a long moment. Then he looked at her again. "Miss Ashwell," he said, "I have been a solicitor for 41 years, and I have not often had occasion to say the following: this is the best organized piece of forensic housekeeping I have encountered in a career not short of difficult cases." He picked up his pen. "Now, let us discuss the matter of witnesses." The matter of witnesses took 2 days to arrange. The 4 the Duke had named, the 2 footmen who had carried the correspondence, Burrell, the groom, proved to require different management. The groom required nothing. He had been waiting 7 months to be asked. Burrell required half an hour of a difficult conversation in which the Duke explained what was in the ledger, and the butler sat very still and then asked, with care, whether the thing he was thinking was true. And the Duke said yes, and Burrell looked at the table for a long moment and said, "Then I will be there, Your Grace." "You have only to name the hour." The footmen required only the specific fact that they had done nothing wrong, and would not be blamed for the correspondence they had carried. Once this was established, they became willing with a speed that confirmed they had also been uncomfortable for some time. Corvin Ashwell was asked to attend a meeting of the estate trustees on a Thursday. The trustees were the Duke, Mr. Fenn, and a second solicitor from the county town named Mr. Vaugh, who was the sort of upright, slow-spoken man whose presence gave proceedings an official weight. They met in the small dining room, at the round table, because Mr. Fenn had opinions about round tables and the psychology of enclosure. Ashwell arrived at 2 and was everything he always was. He sat down and ordered his papers and smiled at the room with the ease of a man who had been in hundreds of such rooms and had never been the person being examined in one. The Duke opened. He spoke about the Eastern pasture and the contracts and 2 matters of genuine estate business, because Mr. Fenn had opinions about that also. The quarry must not look like a quarry. Ashwell answered all of it fluently and well, and Marin, sitting at the sideboard where she had been asked to sit, the Duke had brought her in as his recording secretary, which was a use of the position that surprised no one who had observed the household's actual operations. Marin watched Ashwell's hands. He had a habit. She had noticed it in the second week, when he was thinking quickly, when he was calculating behind the pleasant face. His left thumb rubbed the side of his forefinger in a small repetitive movement that he had trained himself to minimize, but not entirely suppressed. She had been watching it for 3 months. It was very slight today, barely there. The sign of a man who was not yet alarmed but was watchful. The Duke moved to the accounts. He spoke about the charitable dispensations. He produced the household ledger and opened it to the relevant pages and passed it across the table, and Ashwell's left thumb stilled completely. Which was interesting. The thing that alarmed him was not the movement, but the movement stopping. "I wonder," the Duke said, in the tone he used for everything, which was the same tone for every register of what he felt, flat and even and carrying nothing on its surface. If you can explain to me the nature of these entries. Miss Ashwell has the relevant figures. She read them aloud. She had done this in her head for 11 days. She read them without pause, date and sum and heading, in the order that demonstrated the pattern most clearly. And when she finished, there was a silence. Ashwell smiled. It was a good smile. She gave him that. A bookkeeping lag, he said. I believe I mentioned to your grace that the late Duchess's charitable obligations extended past the date of her death. We settled them quarterly, in the usual fashion. To whom, Mr. Fenn said, were they settled? Can you produce the recipients? A beat, very brief. I would need to consult the records. We have the records, said the Duke. He produced the brown ledger from the still room. He set it on the table. Ashwell's face did not change. He had extraordinary control. His thumb was motionless. Only his eyes moved. One quick look at the ledger, one quick calculation, and then back to his pleasant expression, and Marin, watching, thought, he is deciding what is in it. He cannot be certain what is in it. He put that ledger together, and he knows what he put in it, but he is not certain we have read it correctly. This is your handwriting, the Duke said. It was not a question. I keep personal accounts. Most men do. Do most men, Mr. Fenn said, with the particular mildness of a man who has been 41 years at this and needs very little velocity, record specific instructions for specific compounds to be obtained from a specific source, alongside entries that correspond precisely to the dates on which those compounds were obtained? Silence the letters, the Duke said. He produced them, 3 of them, laid out on the table side by side, with the 4th, the one Marin had found and replaced and retrieved, beside them. Your hand. Addressed to the apothecary in Denwick. Dated, in total, across a span of 4 months, beginning 3 months before the late Duchess died. He looked at Ashwell, and his face in this moment was the most controlled she had ever seen it. I want you to explain them to me. The room was very still. The groom was in the corridor, and the 2 footmen, and Burrell, and she knew they were all listening, because she knew this house, and she knew how sound moved through it at this time of year when the windows were shut. Mr. Vaugh, the second solicitor, was writing. He had been writing steadily since the accounts. Ashwell looked at the letters. He looked at them for a long time. His left thumb began again, very slowly, the small movement against his forefinger. Then he looked at Marin. It was not an aggressive look. It was not the look she had been bracing for. It was a look with something in it that surprised her, assessment, and something else, something that had the quality, briefly, of respect. You found the letter in the portfolio, he said. It was not a question. I did. And the ledger. The ledger was in the drawer. He was quiet for a moment. I put it there 3 weeks ago. I meant to move it. I kept not moving it. He looked at the table. I kept thinking there was time. Mr. Ashwell, the Duke's voice had not changed. He would not change it now, here, of all places. He was the still, contained, unraised voice in every room he entered, and in this room it was its most formidable. I am going to ask you one question. I want you to answer it honestly, because whatever you say now is not going to change what happens, and the only choice left to you is whether or not to tell the truth in this room. A pause was she given it. The compound. Deliberately, the silence was very long. Across the room, Marin did not breathe. Ashwell put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them. He looked at the Duke. And then he said, with the same pleasantness he said everything in, but underneath it something that had the quality of exhaustion, old exhaustion, the kind that has been carried for a very long time. It was not sufficient to cause what you believe it caused. I want you to understand that. It was not a lethal dose. It was meant to. She was already ill. The fever was already there. I introduced something that would prevent her from recovering. That is, he stopped. I know what it is. I know what it is, and I have known for 14 months, and I have been. You should not think I have been comfortable. I have not been comfortable. The room was absolutely still. She was going to change the will, he said, and his voice had something in it now that was almost unbearable in a different way than cruelty, the more complicated way she had found the land accounts, the way I had been managing them. She was going to change the will and tell you. She had the evidence, and she was going to use it. I had spent 9 years. 9 years managing this estate and watching it, and knowing that if I could only... He stopped. I know, he said again. I know what it is. The Duke did not speak. His hands were at his sides, and they were very still, and Marin, who had spent 3 months reading those hands, could see what it cost them. She was kind to me, he said, finally, just that. Yes, said Ashwell. And the word from him carried something she had not expected, actual grief. Not remorse, not performance, something older and worse, the grief of a man who had done an irreversible thing and had not been able to stop knowing it. She was. Marin looked at the window. The light was moving on the floor, the way winter light moved in the afternoons here, slow and pale and honest. A sparrow was doing something routine on the window ledge and did not care at all about what was happening in the room. Mr. Fenn spoke. He spoke with the quiet exactness of his profession. He outlined what would happen next, and none of it was what Ashwell had perhaps imagined when he began this 14 months ago, and none of it was what the Duke had perhaps imagined either. Because what Mr. Fenn outlined was not a magistrate. It was not a trial. What Mr. Fenn outlined, at the Duke's instruction, was this. Corvin Ashwell would resign the stewardship of Ashmore Hall with full, uncontested documentation and would be established with an annuity sufficient for an ordinary life in a place at some distance and would not be named in anything, and in return he would produce a full written accounting, signed and witnessed, of every transaction in the private ledger and every letter to the apothecary, to be held in trust against any future necessity. Ashwell looked up. Why, he said, are you? Because you are my cousin, the Duke said. Because the examination of what you did will require explaining how it was possible. And explaining how it was possible requires making public what the land accounts contained, and what my wife found there, and why she had not already brought it to me. And there are people in this house who served her and who do not need to have her memory touched by any part of that. And because he stopped. His voice had stayed flat and even and controlled throughout, but here something changed in it. Not a great change, not a crack in the surface, but a weight coming into it. Because it will not bring her back. And I am tired, said the Duke of Ashmore, of expenditures that do not bring anything back. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of a room in which something large and irrevocable has been set down. Ashwell looked at the table. He looked for a long time. When he looked up, his face had the quality of a man who is carrying something heavier than he expected and has stopped pretending otherwise. The accounting, he said. I will give you everything. He did. He sat in that room for 2 more hours and he gave them everything, and Mr. Vaugh wrote it all, and at the end Ashwell signed it, and Mr. Fenn and the Duke and Marin signed it as witnesses. And Burrell came in from the corridor and signed it too, without being asked, and the groom, whose name was James Fell, and who was 22, and had been carrying a secret for 7 months, with the loyalty of a man who has simply decided what his duty is, and done it, signed it also. When it was done, Ashwell rose from the table and straightened his coat and looked at the Duke. "I am sorry," he said. "It was not enough." He knew it was not enough. "I know," the Duke said. Ashwell left. He was gone from the house by nightfall. He did not take much, which perhaps said something about what he had believed he was building toward, and what the weight of it had actually been. In the small dining room after, there was a long quiet while Mr. Fenn organized his papers, and Mr. Vaugh finished his notes. Marin stayed where she was at the sideboard. She had been keeping herself very still for 2 hours, and she continued to do so, because the alternative was... She was not certain what the alternative was, but it had the texture of something she had been controlling for a long time, and which was not, at this precise moment, easy to keep controlled. Burrell stopped at the door on his way out. He looked at Marin with an expression she had not seen on him before, which was a look of respect in its plain form, without qualification. "Miss Ashwell," he said, "I have served this house for 37 years. I have not said this before to a member of the household staff, and I am aware the circumstances do not usually accommodate it, but I believe it wants saying." He paused. "Well done." Then he went. She heard him in the corridor, speaking to the footman in his ordinary voice, the particular voice of a man who has been shaken and returned to his habits as the most available form of steadiness. James Fell, the groom, put his head in at the door on his way out and said, "Miss," with a nod that had more in it than the single syllable, and then he was gone too. Mr. Fenn rose and took the Duke's hand and said several things about the legal instrument that Marin noted and filed. Then he said, looking at the door through which Ashwell had gone, "A merciful resolution. Your Grace, I confess I expected otherwise." He looked at the Duke. The grounds were not the point, the Duke said. The truth was the point. Mr. Fenn looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Marin. Something passed across his expression, practiced, private, the look of a man who has been watching rooms for 41 years, and he gathered his papers and went, taking Mr. Vaugh with him. The room was empty. Marin rose from the sideboard. The Duke was at the window, which was where he went when he was processing something, and she had learned the difference between the times he went to the window to be alone and the times he went to it and still wanted company. She did not leave. After a while, he said, without turning, "It will not feel like enough. I know it will not feel like enough. It is the most that can be done, and it is not enough, and I knew it would not be, which does not make it less true, and I am tired of knowing things in advance that do not stop them from being true." "Yes," she said, "that is what it is to see clearly. You see the end, and you see it anyway, and the seeing does not make the arriving any easier." He turned from the window. He looked at her in the way he had developed in the past 4 days of looking at her, which was with less management, less of the composed surface, more of whatever was underneath it. "You see clearly," he said. "I try to. You told me what you found when telling me was a risk you had no obligation to take. It was also the right thing to do. The two are not always opposites." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been thinking about what this house needs, about the nature of the arrangement we might." He stopped. He looked away and looked back, and this was the least smooth she had ever seen him. He who was always smooth, who had never needed anything but the flat, even voice and the controlled face. I am doing this badly. You are doing it exactly as well as I would expect, she said, and there was something in her voice she did not try to remove from a man who by his own account has been doing difficult things alone for a long time. Something happened in his expression. You said, he said, and she recognized it, the handing back of words, and felt it somewhere specific, that the people who love you are the ones who stay. I said that to Petra. You said it within my hearing. I was at the end of the corridor. I heard the door and I stayed, because, he stopped again, because I heard her laughing, and I did not want to interrupt it. And then I heard what you said, and a pause that had a quality of difficulty in it, of a man crossing a threshold. I went away and thought about it for 6 weeks. I would have gone on thinking about it for considerably longer, I imagine, if you had not tried to leave. She was very still. I am not asking you to stay because of what you know, he said. I am aware it might appear that way. I am telling you plainly that it is not that, because you told me plainly what you found, and the least I can do is plain speech in return. He looked at her across the room, and his face in this light, in the late afternoon moving across the floor, was the most she had ever seen of it. I am asking you to stay because you are, because the house is different. I am different. Petra is different, in the way that is a child laughing at breakfast, in the way I told you and meant, and in other ways also, ways that are less easy to set out in a sentence. He drew a breath. I have not said this before. To anyone, since I have not said it, and I am aware I am saying it imperfectly. You are saying it well enough. He stopped. I want to deserve the saying of it well enough. I want you to have. I want to not be a man who asks because it is useful, or because I am afraid of what happens if you know something I would rather the world not know. I want to be asking because it is. He looked at her. Because you are the first person I have been glad to see walk into a room in 14 months. Marin looked at the window. She looked at the light on the floor. She looked at the sparrow, which had returned, indifferent and purposeful, to its business on the ledge. I will not stay, she said, because I have nowhere else to go. I want to say that first, so we are not confused about it. I have 30 years of managing and being invisible and making myself useful in difficult houses, and I could do it in another house tomorrow, and we both know it. She looked at him. I am staying because I choose to. That is all. That is the only reason I am prepared to give or accept. Yes, he said, and his voice had something in it she had not heard there before, something light, or lighter, or beginning to be. That is the only reason I would take. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He was very close, and he did not touch her, and the space between them had the quality of a sentence with the last word withheld. Marin, he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, not Miss Ashwell, not the careful title, her name. And she felt it the way she felt the letter when she first held it in the corridor, the way she felt the ledger in the still-room drawer, a thing that changed the weight of everything else. She put her hand in his. He held it as if it were the most careful thing in the room. They did not move for a while. The light finished crossing the floor. The sparrow left. Petra, who had been in the corridor for a period that Marin chose not to calculate precisely, let out a long, elaborate, self-congratulatory breath and then very deliberately made the sound of small footsteps going away, loud enough to be heard, in the manner of a person who wants it known that they were there and are going, and both facts are entirely planned. The Duke looked at the door. Then he looked at Marin. His mouth did the thing it had done in the kitchen yard, the precursor, the shadow, And then it was the thing itself, the full and unguarded thing, and she had been right about what it would look like, which was entirely different, warm and specific and costing nothing, happening freely. The way things happen when a person stops spending all their effort on containment. She had not smiled at him yet. Not really. Not the version she was keeping. She let it go now. They stood there in the empty room for a little while longer, and the winter light continued being honest about everything, and outside the window Ashmore Hall went on being itself, proud, large, cold at the surfaces, warm at its heart. The wedding was in February, which everyone agreed was an eccentric choice for a wedding, and which suited both parties exactly, since neither of them had ever done anything for the reason of it being expected. Mr. Fenn attended, and wore an expression of controlled satisfaction throughout, and pressed Marin's hand after with the same look he had given her in the dining room. Burrell wept. He denied it at length to anyone who inquired, and wept again more thoroughly at the breakfast, which was small and excellent and featured the kedgeree that everyone had admired at exactly the wrong moment in the recent history of the house, because Marin had asked for it specifically, and because the cook, whose name was Mrs. Partridge and who had opinions, had understood entirely. Petra was maid of honor, which was unusual, and wore a dress she had designed herself, and which was also unusual, and stood next to Marin throughout the ceremony with the expression of a person whose extremely sound judgment has been vindicated by events. After, she said, "I knew before you did." "I want that noted." "It is noted," Marin said. "I am going to be insufferable about it." "You are already insufferable about it. We are moving past it." Petra considered this. "All right," she said, and took Marin's hand, and the three of them walked out of the small chapel into the February cold, and the air had in it the first suggestion of something that was not quite yet spring, but was considering its options. James Fell, who was promoted to head groom in March, married the dairymaid in April. Burrell retired the following autumn on a pension the Duke named himself, and kept a cottage on the estate property, and appeared at dinner uninvited with enough frequency that it became a custom rather than an inconvenience. The two footmen, Thomas and Edward, were given their characters in glowing form and went to houses in London, and Thomas eventually opened a small hotel and put in the advertisement that his training had been at Ashmore Hall, which the Duke confirmed when asked, because it was true. Mr. Fenn came to dinner twice a year and was insufferable at chess, and admitted it freely, and lost with the composure of a man who plays chess for pleasure. Corvin Ashwell went to the Continent. Marin heard of him once, 2 years later, through a letter to Mr. Fenn. He was in a city she had never seen, managing the accounts of a small trading house, living, by all accounts, quietly. She felt about this the thing she had decided to feel about it, which was the complex thing rather than the clean thing, because she had 30 years of complicated experience, and she knew that clean things were mainly the invention of people who had not been paying attention. She let it be complex. She moved on. Her mother had been a glover's daughter in a small town in the West, and she had married a man who had tried and failed to be a solicitor, and had, in the trying, given Marin a gift he did not know he was giving. Access to the books, the habit of numbers, the specific genius for pattern that had saved, at last, a house she had come to by accident and chosen to call home. The wrong she could not repair was this: he had died not knowing she had found any of it useful. The thing the epilogue could offer instead was a trust endowed in his name for the education of girls in the western counties who had the habit of numbers and no one to notice it, which was not the same as his knowing, but was the kind of thing that continues after knowing ends. On an evening in the following November, almost exactly a year after the morning she had stood in the carriage yard with her valise, Marin came in from the kitchen garden with the last of the autumn herbs and found Petra at the kitchen table working geometry with a piece of chalk and an expression of concentration. The Duke was already home. She heard him in the hall, the particular sound of his coat being taken by the hallboy, the quiet exchange of words that was the house recognizing its center of gravity. Petra looked up from the geometry. "He'll want tea," Petra said, with the air of a person managing a household she has staked a claim in. "He will," Marin agreed. "I'll tell Mrs. Partridge." She gathered the chalk with the thoroughness of someone who does not want to be told to gather it. Miss Ashwell. It was still what Petra called her, and neither of them had found it necessary to change, because the name had become its own kind of meaning. "Yes, you stayed," Petra said, and her voice was entirely matter-of-fact, and entirely not. Even when it was difficult. It was not so very difficult, Marin said, in the end. Petra nodded, as if this confirmed something she had known for some time, and slid off the bench and went to find Mrs. Partridge. Marin set the herbs on the table and stood in the kitchen in the November evening, with the smell of rosemary on her hands and the sound of the house settling around her. The particular sound of a house that knows where everyone is and is satisfied by the knowing. The difficult thing and the right thing were not always the same thing. But sometimes, on the best evenings in the winter kitchen, with the sound of a man's coat being taken in the hall and a child's footsteps going purposefully toward the warmth of the hearth, they were. If this story stayed with you a little longer than you expected, if you found yourself somewhere between the morning carriage and the winter kitchen and felt the cold and then the warmth, then you already know why we tell them. Here, by this fire, we are in the business of the overlooked being seen. The quiet ones, the ones who held the candle steady and said nothing until saying was the only honest thing left. Pull your chair a little closer, if you like. The kettle is always on, and there is always another story waiting in the dark just outside the circle of the light. Tell me, before you go, what was the moment that held you? The carriage at dawn? The room after, when the lamp was the only witness? Or something smaller? Something you would have done differently? Leave it below. I read every word, and I answer when I can. If you have found your way here, and you are glad of it, there is a way to keep your place by this fire. It costs only a moment, and it means the next story finds you. Until then, sleep well, and be gentle with the ones who stayed.